hopefully people are joining in. We've got 1,000 registrations for today. People are sort of coming on board right this minute, and also this is being streamed live on YouTube for those people who couldn't join us in this way today. So before we get going, I'll just open us with karakia. So me karakia tātou, manawa mai te Maori nuku, manawa mai te Maori rangi, kia mahara ki te whakaro, kia mahara ki te aroha, kia mātou, kia pakari, kia aroha tētahi ki te tahi. He oranga wairua, he oranga hingaru, he oranga tinana, he oranga whānau, kia Maori tū, kia Maori ora, haumi e, hui e, tairaki e. So kia ora again, my name is Shaun Robinson. I'm the Chief Executive of the Mental Health Foundation, and it's my real pleasure and honour to be emceeing today our workplace webinar in Mental Health Awareness Week. Mental Health Awareness Week should be every week, should be every day, but it just keeps getting bigger and bigger every year. And the theme this year is reconnect with the people and the places that lift you up. And I guess, you know, that the reason for that theme is pretty obvious. You know, we've had 2.5 years of a lot of barriers and difficulties that have made it harder for us to connect to one another, connect to those people that we care about, connect to our communities, connect to our workplaces. And, you know, it's definitely had an impact on people's mental health. And one of the key themes for today in a workplace context is the impact that this has had on burnout in the workplace. So, you know, the research is showing us that 1 in 3 workers are struggling with burnout in the post-COVID environment. Our own Mental Health Foundation research is showing that across Aotearoa, New Zealand, the number of people who have dangerously low mental well-being as assessed against the World Health Organization wellbeing tool, the WHO5, has increased from 25% at the beginning of COVID to 36%. So we're definitely, we're definitely facing some challenges, and this is on top of the ongoing challenges to our mental health and well-being. So today I'm really pleased to introduce our panel who are going to help us to sort of navigate some of these challenges. So Suzi McAlpine, who is a leadership coach, blogger, author, best-selling author of Beyond Burnout, award-winning blogger for the Leaders Digest, coach to chief executives and organisations, and she also lives in sunny Nelson. So kia ora, Suzi.
Kia ora.
Dr. Jarrod Haar, who's Professor of Human Resource Management at AUT in Tamaki Makaurau, and Jarrod whakapapasta Ngāti Manawapoto and Ngāti Mahuta, and Jarrod's research focuses on kaimahi, on employees, and he's a world-ranked researcher, having won best practice industry paper awards and multiple research grants. And then our third panelist is Dr. Dougal Sutherland. Dougal is a clinical psychologist and CEO of Umbrella Wellbeing, which is an organisation that provides workplace psychology and wellbeing services to organisations and businesses. Dougal's also an adjunct teaching fellow in clinical psychology at Victoria University. So, yeah, we're really spoilt with the quality of the people that we've got contributing today. So the way this is going to work, we've got some questions that we're going to pose to different members of the panel. Then really encourage you to put your own questions around burnout, around wellbeing, mental health in the workplace in the chat, and we will come to those later on in the webinar today. So keep those coming, and we'll deal with those after a series of initial questions. So getting straight into it, my first question is to Suzi, yeah, possibly the most pressing issue at the moment is burnout in the post-COVID lockdown and constraint sort of environments. While COVID's still with us, that adds to it. So let's start, if I can ask you, to what is burnout? Define it a little bit for us, and then sort of what are some of the warning signs? What can we do about it? How will we recognise it?
Yeah, so burnout has become part of our workplace vernacular. I think, often we'll say, gosh, I'm so burnt out after that week from hell. When true burnout is more malevolent, it's more insidious, it kind of creeps up on us. It's a state of emotional, physical, and mental exhaustion caused by excessive and prolonged stress related to our professional life. And it's really important that we don't demonize stress in and of itself. In fact, a certain amount of stress is not only good for our performance at work, it's really good for our well-being. It's when that stress becomes chronic, unremitting, over a long period of time, what I call baked into the role, that's where you're more likely to see burnout happen. And there are three symptoms or red flags, what I call red flags of burnout, that we need to look out for in ourselves and those that we're leading and our colleagues. And the first one is chronic exhaustion. So this is when I'm feeling completely fatigued, chronically exhausted most of the time, or all of the time. It's when you lose your bounce back factor, your batteries won't recharge, you go on holiday, but it doesn't do its trick. You come back just as exhausted as you did before you left. So that's the first red flag or symptom. The second symptom to look out for is increased cynicism or depersonalization. So Shaun, this is when things that didn't used to get under my skin suddenly frustrate the heck out of me. I sort of feel disillusioned. What's the point? I may lose control of my emotions, and I start to withdraw. So this is the depersonalization. I might start to withdraw and lean out towards things and people that I would normally lean into. So for example, if you were in healthcare, you might start to withdraw from patients as well as colleagues. And the third red flag or a symptom of burnout is reduced professional efficacy. So this is kind of like I'm digging deeper, I'm working harder, but I just don't feel like I'm actually able to achieve anything. Nothing I'm doing is making a difference. You can start to make cognitive errors. Tasks that you used to be able to do quite easily suddenly take Herculean effort. I remember somebody I interviewed in the research for my book said it's a bit like running a marathon in molasses, and I think that really talks to it. So those are the three symptoms or red flags to look out for when it comes to burnout.
Thank you, Suzi. Yeah, no, that's I'm sure everybody's currently doing a little inventory of themselves and the people they work with and going, oh, yeah. Yeah, no, that's really, really useful. Thank you for that. My second question is to you, Dougal, and that is about isolation and reconnecting in the workplace. So there's a lot of systematic and sort of organizational factors that can contribute to burnout, but we know that isolation is a big factor, and reconnecting or feeling connected and part of the workplace is a really strong protective factor for people in relation to burnout. So what are some of the practical ways that we can create connection or reconnection in the workplace? And what role does a manager and a leader have in that?
Yeah, thanks, Shaun. And look, I think I absolutely agree with you that sense of isolation, of being apart from others, is continuing on a little bit from post-COVID as people stay working at home and stay working that hybrid working model. And I know Jarrod's got some great data on that. There are a couple of things I would say around how to reconnect and what workplaces can do. I think firstly is the idea that we actually need to be intentional about reconnecting, and it blends in so well with the Mental Health Foundation's theme this year. Is that we used to do the kind of casual thing, you know, the water cooler conversations that would just happen. But I think now workplaces and individual workers as well really need to be intentional about how they reconnect and when they reconnect with people, that it's not something that so spontaneously happens anymore. So thinking about, you know, when are your people in the workplace, and how are you structuring your work so that people do get together? Do they have opportunities to interact with each other, whether that's in person or online? We know online's an okay way of interacting. I don't think it replaces getting together in person. But so being intentional rather than spontaneous. It's okay for workplaces to say we would like everybody to come in on, you know, a couple of times a month or a couple of times a week. And that might be part of the intentionality about it, to say, actually, we really want you to come in. And the third thing I would say is build deep wells rather than strong fences. And this is a little anecdote that I picked up from somebody else, so not my original thought, but it was around the idea of somebody had gone to visit a sheep station in outback Australia, you know, where it's, you know, desperately dry. And they noticed that there were no fences around for the livestock. And they said, how do you keep all your livestock? How do you keep all your sheep around the farm? And he said, you know, you've got no fences. And the farmer said, we just dig deep wells. We make it really attractive for the livestock to stay around. And we don't want to take the analogy of livestock and employees too far, but you know, in a workplace, what are you doing to make your workplace an attractive place to be, rather than setting lots of rules and regulations around we must do this and we mustn't do this? What are you doing to create a really attractive workplace that people will go, do you know what, I actually want to be there a couple of days a week? And we know that when people are then together, there's those opportunities for reconnection. So those are a few of the practical things I'd say, Shaun.
Awesome. I really love that analogy. I'm going to steal it too. Originality is much overrated. Yeah, awesome. Thank you. So, Jarrod, moving on to you. So, according to one of your recent studies, Kaimahi Maori employees are 593.9% higher risk of burnout. So, yeah, why is that? And what can employers and leaders do to support Kaimahi Maori in the workplace and turn that around?
Yeah, kia ora there, Shaun. So we could probably just call it 6 times the risk, right?
Yeah,
which is ginormous. A couple of reasons behind it. One is, you know, and I think we see the split here between low-skilled and high-skilled Māori specifically. Low-skilled Māori working lots of hours, Māori earning around 10, 11% less income, so they've got to work more hours just to get by. And that data is pre this inflation period we're in right this very kind of last couple of months. So having to work lots. The other one, though, is the professional Māori who get caught into what myself and a colleague have called this kind of double cultural shift, where you're doing your traditional job but end up being the kind of cultural translator in the workplace. And ironically, we were looking at academics, and our research resonated a lot with lawyers and accountants, even media people. You know, I had lots of media attention because when they sent the story around the office, everybody who was non-Māori went, oh, she's, that's you, isn't it? And the Māori person went, yeah, I'm the guy who does my own job, plus all of the translations and interpretation for you guys. And it was good because guilt was a good factor to get attention. So I guess for managers, for leaders, it's understanding that dynamic. And one thing our research pulled out was that there's an overload around work because you're doing too much, or the expectation is you're doing too much. And it isn't something you could say, hey, you can just say no, right? Because what happens is, as the only Maori in the workspace, you think, oh, if I don't do it, it'll go to somebody else and they may make a total mess of it. And that's not fair for the iwi or hapu we're engaging with. And so I will do it. So it's really just about, kind of acknowledging the extra workload and trying to manage that. I think we're only just starting to get a bit more attention towards this. So I do think it's something we may get better with as a country over time, but we do need more insight into that. Hope that helps.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Jarrod. And I mean, look, I became aware of your research and of that conclusion recently, and I have to say I look at myself and some of my expectations of my kaumaki Maori and also other people in the organisation who might be from Asian cultures or Pacifica cultures, and yeah, I've definitely been guilty of that. So it's a great thing to be aware of, and yeah, thank you, really appreciate it. I guess it kind of leads into my next question, which I'll direct to Suzi, which is about a sense of control or autonomy or ability to have sort of some control of your work, your day at work, as being a really core psychological need for human beings in any space, but definitely in the workplace, and it's critical for our psychological safety. We're in very uncertain times when a lot of things are beyond our control. So how can a workplace help employees get more of this sense of control in their lives and kind of reconnect with that as we're coming out of the lockdown and other restrictions?
Yeah, you're so right there, Shaun. I think not having a sense of control over our lives is one of the worst feelings as humans. It's and a lack of control is one of the 6 causes of burnout. And as we know, burnout was on the rise before COVID, so we can't blame COVID for all our burnout woes, but there's no big leap to see that obviously a lack of control has been exacerbated. And so I think there are some things that leaders and organisations can do to really enable people within their organisations to have a greater sense of control. The first is to involve people as much as possible in the how and the why of their work, not just the what. So if we can involve people and enable employees to have a say into how they carry out their work, so embrace flexibility as much as possible within the constraints and confines of your culture and your organisation, because when people feel that they have some say into how they carry out their work, that can bring them a sense of control. And if they're the ones that are doing the work, they've probably got some really good ideas for a start. I think definitely give people input into decisions that affect them. This seems like common sense, but what's that saying? Common sense ain't that common. So one of the causes of lack of control is no influence or having a say in terms of decisions that actually affect us. So that's another one. An interesting thing that the research showed is that when people can work from their strengths over time, that acts as a kind of a buffer against burnout. And so one other way that people can have control over their work is if teams and leaders can work with individuals and their teams to identify their strengths. So that's when, what I'm good at and what I love doing, combines. And so if you can start to help identify those strengths and then enable people to work from strengths, then that's really, really going to help as well. simple leadership practices. So what we do know is that there's a direct link between unskilled and poor leadership practices and increased rates of burnout. And so if you can really equip your leaders and upskill them in some really simple but really powerful leadership practices like coaching, giving, receiving, and seeking feedback, active listening, delegation, getting better at delegation, all of these things can have a trickle-on effect to people's level of control. I think get better at organising and prioritising at an organisational level. Ask at the highest levels, what can we ditch? What can we delay? Let's make a to-don't list. Be really clear about the organisational priorities and not have too many. And finally, I think increased clarity around communication, especially around tasks. So if you can get better at communicating, particularly around task allocation, that's going to give some people a sense of control. But even just simply, Stephen Covey came up with the circle of influence, circle of control model way back in the 90s. And what I have seen teams do really effectively is even if there's a period of stress or something that's really causing that high level of stress, leaders who sit down with their teams and go, let's purposefully identify what's our circle of concern. So these are things that really worry us and stress us, but we have no control over. And let's start to focus our locus of control on what's within our ability to control and what's within our ability to influence. And that really gives people a sense of agency. So even just having conversations around that can be really helpful.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm being reminded of and learning so much from being in this webinar. I'm doing my own little checklist internally, what's outside my control, what's inside my control. So thank you so much. That's awesome. Dougal, this is another one for you. You've spoken about the ability to work from home as the kind of great equalizer, and that hybrid working offers people options to work from home that can really promote fairness and equity amongst staff. So can you speak a little bit about that and how that works and why that's so good for people?
Yeah, so hybrid working is that ability to work some days at home and some days in the workplace, wherever that is, whether it's in the office or wherever your workplace is. And I'm guessing that at least a third of the panelists, or half perhaps, are working from home today. I'm working at home, and there are some obvious benefits to that. In fact, it really, I was listening to Suzi speaking, and it really taps into some of those aspects of being able to control your workplace and also feeling like you have some sense of autonomy and say over what you're going to do in your day. And we know that's a really good protective factor against burnout as well, that when you're at home and you don't have the commute. So if you're living in Auckland or another busy city, I was going to say Wellington, but we're not all that busy. But if you're living in Auckland, you don't have to commute for 90 minutes a day, because you can just get up and go into work. So that when you talk to people who work from home some of the time, they talk about those advantages. I can choose what I want to do more. I'm more flexible on my work. I don't have the daily hassles of commuting and sitting in a car or on transport for a long time. Those are really good things for our well-being. It does allow people the space to do things like, I'm going to go out and walk the dog at lunchtime and hopefully get out into the fresh air and the sunshine. And so there's some really good advantages of that. I think, particularly those aspects of control and autonomy. We know there is a sweet spot for working from home or from working in that hybrid role. It's a big sweet spot, but it's still a sweet spot of around, I usually say to people, of about 2 to 3 days at home and 2 to 3 days in the office or in your workplace, wherever your workplace is. And that I think we do want to be aware, though, too, that there's a risk of we're at risk of creating sort of two classes of workers. We used to have blue collar workers and white collar workers, and I think there is a risk at the moment that we create another class of workers who can work from home and those who aren't able to work from home. And arguably those people that can't work from home are possibly more at risk because they're not able to do those things that we were just talking about. And so for those people, I would say to workplaces, ask your people what you need. There isn't one size that fits all. We can't just say, just do this if you can't work from home. But and picking up on Suzi's point about really engaging and talking to your people and saying, hey, look, if we can't work from home because of, if you're an essential service, it's pretty hard to do surgery from your home office. I assume, I don't know, I can't do surgery, but I'm guessing it is. And there are some manual labours you simply can't do at home. But ask your people, engage with them and say, hey, we know that this isn't possible for you. So what is going to make your work more attractive, better? It almost links back to that point about digging deep wells as well, right? So asking people and digging deep wells. So for those people that have got the working from home ability, I think it's great to have some clear policies around that, so that an organisation has some structure. It doesn't have to be really, really set in stone or anything, but just the acknowledgement that people there are benefits to it, and we want to support people to do that. And if you can't do that because of your organisation, then engage with your people and say to them, hey, what's going to make your workplace a good place to be in? Given that you're hearing all the time about these people working from home and what they can do, what's going to make your workplace going to be a great place to be in, and what can we do to engage you in that process?
Awesome, yeah. Thank you, Dougal. And yeah, I think that reminder, it's not one size fits all, and it is a dialogue, and it is coming to some kind of some sort of plan that works for the employee and works for the organisation. And I can think of so many people, the unsung heroes of the last 2.5 years. There's the manual workers like surgeons who are manual workers, and there's other manual workers who don't get quite so much status. And then there's just the people who've been filling our shelves with food and selling it to us and driving the trucks to get us there and testing us for COVID-19. So yeah, a lot of challenges there, but thank you for that. I guess sort of a similar theme, and a question for you, Jarrod. Dougal just talked about a sort of sweet spot there with working from home. Some of your research has shown that hybrid workers are, highly productive and innovative, and working from home has that positive, but there's also that flip side when you get out of the sweet spot, that it can really increase sense of loneliness, disconnection, overload, and feelings of wanting to quit and burnout being a feature of working from home in the wrong kind of conditions. So can you talk to us about that, and how can we work at meaningful connection as that big protective factor for people that are working from home, and yeah, just how can we counter the downside of too much time on our own working from home?
Yep, lovely. So I've been looking across the last 2.5 years now already. Gosh, so we've got all in the office versus all in the home and hybrid. That kind of 2 to 3 days working from home or office being the sweet spot. And my data does show that it's the 5 days a week from home that's the black spot. That is the danger zone. Significantly higher levels of job burnout, higher levels of work demands. Part of this is purely the fact that if I roll out of bed and I make my coffee and I come into my office and I'm working away today and tomorrow, that's fine. And then I go into work, right? I reset, and then I finish work, and then I come home. But if I'm at home every single day working, is my home, my home office may turn into more the office home. And you just see people working too many hours, blurring those kind of boundaries and annoying everybody else in the household probably. So one thing here, I did some analysis this morning. High work demands is a big determinant of being burnt out, and your chances of burning out because you've got too much work to do, 3.6 times the risk factor. Any day of the week, I'd say to you, gee whiz, that's pretty bad. But on top of that, if you feel lonely, so if I have no connections, I don't have somebody to talk to, it's 5.4 times the risk factor in spite of all of those work demands. So even when we include work demands, being lonely or feeling really lonely when you're in paid employment is a more detrimental risk. This is New Zealand data from May 2022. So those who are working from home 5 days a week, you know, the advice has to be, you've got to, two things. One is you either get into the workplace at least 1 or 2 days a week, make some human connections, or you try to make some connections outside of the workplace. Say you're working for an employer in a different city and there is no chance to commute in. Well, then you need to go and get to one of those hubs that have, you know, workplace things. Spend the day hanging out, even if it's totally different people. And maybe on that day, you're going to spend a little bit more time socializing. Think of it as you're just trying to fill up the cup a little bit, right? Yeah. Or perhaps we go back to Dougal's one, you know, you need to draw from the well of human connections and help sate that thirst. Because if you don't, those who are working 5 days a week really are kind of thirsting and gonna, you know, will burn out. So clearly it's important. If you are doing meaningful work, though, meaningful work can be really beneficial to buffer that detrimental effect of work. But my data says that if we go the next step and I still actually burn out, then doing meaningful work can be quite dangerous, because we tend to, you know, I go, oh my gosh, I'm really fatigued. I don't know if my job's, oh, but it's so important work that I'll just keep going. So we do need to, and again, this is why social connections are important. When Suzi and I are having a coffee and she goes, gee whiz, Jarrod, you're looking exhausted, mate. We do need to listen and react to those around us and think, okay, maybe it's time to take the foot off the pedal, slow things down a little bit, get to some kind of calmer level, you know, rather than just saying, oh, but yeah, my work is so important. I'm doing donations for, you know, some charity. Great, that is great, but it's not worth burning out and then wiping yourself out for 3+ months, right? So just a little warning there, especially those working 5 days a week, and especially those who use doing meaningful work, which is great if you've got it, but pushing themselves to breaking point. Remember, we've got to think a little bit maybe like an athlete, you know, don't want to overtrain. We don't want to overwork, right? We've got to be smart and manage ourselves. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Jarrod. Yeah, absolutely. Certainly working in mental health, I know all about the, you know, this is meaningful, we must keep going sort of thing, which have to manage for myself, but also, you know, help the team to manage as well. So yeah, thank you. That's really, really useful. And I think the loneliness, you know, is massively underestimated. You know, we do have some people that work from home in different parts of the country because they want to live there. And yeah, keeping them connected is vital. And I know, you know, at least one of them has kind of said to me, yeah, it's lonely. And so creating those opportunities to go to an office, even if it's not with people from your own organisation, all of those things, totally agree. This is kind of a general question for all of us, really, or for everybody on the panel. So what can employers and managers do to help their employees reconnect with the team? You know, with the wider organisation, and also with that sort of sense of purpose, that shared mission, sort of sense of an organisational culture, and even its values. So yeah, what can we as managers and leaders do to help people connect with other people, but also with the organisation's purpose and its values, and get that strong sense of belonging? So I'll throw that open.
Well, one of the things that I think leaders and organisations can do to answer that, Shaun, is to have more how are we going conversations. So when I look around, if I'm a fly on the wall in most organisations that I work with, there's a lot of what are we doing conversations. So conversations focused on tasks and projects and deadlines and things, right? And that's really important because otherwise, you know, nothing's going to get done. And I think that there is a real opportunity for leaders, especially, to start creating space to have more how are we going conversations. So that might be having, you know, in your one-on-ones with your direct reports, you know, what have been the highlights and lowlights in the last month for you, and really listening, actively listening to that. It might look like a leader starting a team meeting with, on a scale of 1 to 10, you know, how's your well-being? And I'll go first. Mine's actually a 5. It's not feeling so great. So starting to have safe conversations around space with lots of listening about how are we going conversations, because I think if people feel listened to, if they feel heard, if it creates a safe space, then it's going to start to connect into, you know, the values and the culture of the organisation. And the second thing I would say, particularly when it comes to how do we reconnect people to the culture and values of an organisation, I would say leaders need to model what they want to see in others, particularly when it comes around culture and values. And I think a lot of leaders underestimate the shadow they cast. You know, when you whisper, it comes out like a shout. And so if you really want to see the culture and values of the organisation more than just stuck up, you know, a shiny plaque stuck up on a wall, I think the most important thing you should do is start to look in the mirror and start to model those things yourself, because that's the best way to influence that on others. So that would be one connection or one idea I've got.
Awesome. Thank you, Susie.
You know, I'll just pick up on that too. I you know, I think that underlines, sorry, Susie's point was underlining the importance of actually engaging and talking to your people. And if that may well be a value that you have or you want to put forward in your organisation, actually we really value what you've got to say. And what ideas have you got for how we can make this a good place to be and to connect? So not assuming that as the leader or the manager, you're going to know it all, or you're going to know what everybody in all the different layers or levels of your organisation needs. So asking them to come up with ideas, because it's much more likely that people will be engaged with those if they come up with the ideas. I think too, putting some money behind it. You know, that nothing talks louder than an organisation putting some money behind it. That really shows what an organisation values. And I've noticed in the little chat comments, people have been talking a bit about social clubs, and you know, that could well be a great idea. And actually, what's the organisation's contribution to the social club? If we really value people getting together, socialising, then we're going to pitch in and we're going to make such and such a contribution to the social club or to whatever it is. The other thing I'd add in too is think back to what you did during lockdowns. In our work with organisations, a number of them actually did this quite well. And I come across places that would say, oh, you know, what did you guys do during lockdown for connecting? They said, oh, every day or a couple of times a week, we used to have a meeting for half an hour in the morning. It wasn't work. We didn't talk about work. We were just connecting in, and it wasn't compulsory. It was just you could jump in if you wanted to. And weirdly enough, I felt like I got to know my colleagues much better because, you know, I'd see them in their pajamas or the cat and knocking over something behind them or the kids wandering around. And I actually got to know them as people. And then you talk to those same organisations, you know, after lockdown, you say, how are those meetings going? And they say, oh, we don't do those anymore. Those were only for lockdown. And it's like, what? Why? What have you learned from lockdown that you can actually bring through and continue going to really enhance it's a meaningful social connection I'm talking about here, one where you can share experiences and positive emotions with each other, not just, doing things like daily quizzes are great, and let's take it a step further too, so that you can really connect with people, because that's going to be the social gel that keeps your people in your workplace together.
Yeah, I mean, I can comment to that our Maori engagement team at the Mental Health Foundation really did us proud during the last 2.5 years. We have a tradition of daily karakia and waiata practice in Pānui, and of course it all had to go online, but that it was voluntary, it was all those things, but it was huge for keeping us connected. And it's something we started before lockdowns, we carried it on through lockdowns. I think people super appreciated it. And now, we're carrying it on, and it has multiple reasons, but that sense of connection is really, really strong. Yeah. Any thoughts from you, Jarrod?
Yep, sure. I guess one of my things is, and my research bears this out, work meetings, and I have put the word work in front of that because I will segue off Dougal's comments there. We typically, organizations typically have too many meetings and they're too long and they're not really efficient. Now, Dougal used the meetings and yourself there, right, to talk about how to test how everybody is going. I guess we should encourage organizations not to do a lunchtime meeting that's 12 to 1 and half of it's filled of work, because guess what? That's a work meeting. Let's do it at 11:30, not talk about work, but talk about each other. Continue into lunch when the organization's putting on the lunch. Some other data I have on a PhD's research, I was just reading this morning, a lot of people are saying, I don't see the CEO, I don't see the big boss in my organization that much. Where are they? A good chance for the CEO and senior managers, leaders, and it might, if you're a company of 20, that might be everybody, right? But to be in that meeting, even if it's once a week, a chance to be seen, to hear what people are thinking, bounce ideas off, capture the mood of the workforce, feed them, and then maybe leave them with half an hour to get the rest of the team kind of socializing amongst themselves. So I think that's one way we could reconnect people. And it also gives people a chance to say, hey, Dougal, I need to raise this important issue with you, and go, wow, great, I didn't know about that. And I appreciate the opportunity. So less work meetings and maybe a bit more social interactions captured under the word meeting, but more social, I think, especially than work.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So I'm going to move on to some of the questions that have come through in the Q&A now. So somebody has asked, why do we only talk about and define burnout in relation to our employment? What about the impacts of things that are happening in our personal life or other, outside of life environment? How does that impact on burnout?
Do you want to go? Yeah.
Yes. Look. I think it's a really good question. I think technically often we use the term burnout to apply just to workplaces, but of course we bring our whole selves to work and we bring our whole selves home again. And the organisations that I work with, where they've really got it together around workplace wellbeing, are those organisations who are actually addressing the out of workplace stressors. So when you poll people, when you ask them, they often say, do you know what, the biggest things that we're having difficulty that are causing stress at work for me are finances and parenting and relationships. Now, you could, as an organisation, go, well, that's nothing to do with us. That's your own personal life. But if you're an onto it organisation that takes a holistic approach, you'll probably go, I want our people to be functioning really well at work. And that means I might have to think outside the box a wee bit. So some organisations that we work with are actually doing those things. They're providing financial advice. They're helping with relationships. They're helping with parenting, because they know that if they get those things right for their people, then their people are going to be have a much better time at work. So I think it's about, how do you have that, how do you address both? How do you address the whole person and not just go, well, we're just putting them into a box because they're here at work, and when they're out of work, they're nothing to do with us. Of course, it's not like that. So what's your organisation doing that looks after the whole person? And that can be a challenge for some people, and fair enough. And it depends, I think, where you are on your wellbeing journey. But that to me is really about helping people thrive and flourish rather than just going, well, are they okay enough to be at work? Because we really want to have a workforce that's getting people thriving, flourishing, and excelling, not just sort of going, well, I'm okay to be at work and I can do that. Okay, so that's my 2 cents.
Any other comments from the panel?
Not that I could do in a few minutes.
Yeah. Look, I think I guess a reflection from me is that, you know, this is to our benefit as employers, even if it wasn't the right thing to do as human beings. You know, we're in a hugely difficult recruitment and retention market. So the better we can be as employers and the more flexible we can be as employers and the more we look after our people and are in a, you know, I love that deep well, you know, we're an attractive place to work. We're, you know, there's a lot of, you know, great suggestions coming up in the chat, you know, the importance of flexible, not just flexibility to work from home, but flexible times during the day so that people can, you know, accommodate things they need to do with their kids or with, you know, with their home life. All of these things, I think, just make us more attractive as employers. One of the things we tried last year, and we're now making a permanent thing, is that during daylight saving we have summer hours. So you know, people, if they can manage the way they work, so they keep their, you know, keep producing what they need to do, they can finish at, you know, lunchtime on a Friday, so that we get that extra, you know, bit of the weekend during the summer. You know, all of these things during the lockdowns, it kind of grew out of during the lockdowns. We gave people a half day a week for personal admin because, you know, so many of the daily activities of life, like shopping and things, were taking so much longer. So, yeah, it's really about being creative. And what I have certainly found is that it's had no detrimental impact on what we actually produce. In fact, you know, we're knocking it out of the park. Yeah, so I think it's definitely to our advantage. Yeah, another question that's come up that I'll pitch to everybody is, look, everyone has their limits. You know, how do you push back when there is stress, a restructure, COVID impacts, aftermath of a storm or a natural disaster, moving offices, when you can't say no to any of that? How do you make space to slow down and, you know, make it all doable when there are so many of these pressures that we can't control? Anyone got the secret solution to that one?
Yeah, I'll have a quick stab at that one. I actually think, you know, we do need to communicate, and this is perhaps a good example of, you know, supervisors, the immediate level leaders. So Dougal's my immediate boss, and I need to say, you know what, Dougal, you know, I need a time out here. I just got too much going on. He goes, oh yeah, but I just need this report tomorrow. Yeah, but you needed the last 5 days worth of reports at the end of the day while I'm still trying to do this other project, right? You know, I think it's that conversation, and we need to encourage, so leaders need to encourage their workers to say, hey, I'm just totally snowed under. Remember, Suzi used to work with us and she's left, and now I'm doing her. Oh, that's right. Yeah, I do. You know, because job creep is kind of one of these things that's bubbling away in the back scenes as well. So I know it is tough for people to say, oh, I don't want to say no. You know, and like in my job, we just get peppered nonstop with you know, offers to do things for which you don't get paid, and it's part of the job, but it's all just extra hours. And at some stage, you do need to say, for my own well-being, and maybe that's a good way you know, we need a little personal mantra. For my own well-being, I need to say no, or remind my boss, hey, I need to time out on your request because I just don't have any capacity at the moment. And it may remind the boss that, oh, actually, gosh, I know I've been relying too much on you, and okay, I will step back and find somebody else to do it. Because one thing I think in New Zealand we're slightly guilty of is we reward the productive with more work.
Yeah.
I know you can do it. can you do this extra thing? Yay, more work, and people might get promoted, they might get a pay rise, but at some stage, if I then spontaneously combust, that's no good for anybody. So remind leaders that those who say, well, actually, I need to call a timeout, that might be your top talent, right? And we want to retain them and keep them functioning well.
Yeah. I love what you're saying there, Jarrod, and it's one of the biggest myths that I come across. It's a slight segue and I will come back to adding my bit to the question. But one of the most common myths that I come across when it comes to burnout is that if you experience burnout, you're somehow mentally weak, or just take a teaspoon of cement and harden up. And what we know is some of the research is that it's your most passionate, your highest performing employees may be most at risk because of the reasons that Jarrod has been outlining today. Once again, I'm going to talk to the leaders on the call because you have way more influence than an individual contributor. Although if you are an individual contributor, there are ways to influence up, is to regularly have conversations around priorities. I remember when I was a leader and I would inadvertently, pass on some extra tasks or delegation. And one of my highest performers would say, Nigel would go, actually, Suzi, that's great, but this is also what I've got on my list. Given that this is a new priority, either can we have some more resource or what needs to change? So this constant regular communication around priorities and negotiation is really, really important. And this is where I think one of the most important meetings, if it's run well, in a leader's calendar is the one-on-one with their direct reports. You treat it like it's one of the most important meetings, as if it was an important client, and include that how are you going conversation. So in your instance, I know we've got lots on, we've had this, all these things that the person who asked the question talked about. How's that impacting you? How are you going with that? Followed by lots of active listening, and co-creating some solutions, which has been another one of the themes that come through. So don't make it career limiting for people to put their hand up and saying, actually, I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed. You might want to say, thank you for sharing that with me.
And can I just pick up on that too? I think often there's, as Suzi mentioned, it's about, okay, what are the priorities? And if you've want me to do this, then something's got to change. I think often we take an individual perspective around burnout and say, as Suzi mentioned earlier, it must be you because you're a bit mentally weak, or you've got too much on your workload or on your plate, so we'll take something off, which means you give it to somebody else. And I think there's a much bigger systems piece there about saying, actually, what as a workplace are we doing to look at our workload and our prioritizing of work? And we need to do this as an entire organization, because it's about how we run as an organization rather than a few individuals. That's really going to make the difference. And so what are we doing? And that's a big piece of work around how do organizations figure out what their workload is, what their workflow is, and what their priorities are when they're trying to dish out work, or when they've got something new on, and how do they decide what's on top and what's below, rather than just saying to an individual, well, you do it, and if you can't do it, we'll give it to somebody else. So I think organizations having a big look at themselves as a whole organization is a really key factor in this as well.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, people. I just throw into that, and I'm really conscious of what you said before, Suzi, about leaders throwing a big shadow that they're not always aware of. I think it's really important to have other channels by which people can raise some of these concerns, because there is a power imbalance when you're the boss, whether you're a team lead or a manager or a CEO. And I mean, it's really important to try and create those trusting relationships where people can tell you what's going on. And I think there's always a power imbalance. So, it's why I never mind there being union presence in my workplace, or, we have a wish committee, which is not Make-A-Wish. It's our health and safety. It's a wellbeing, health and safety. That's what the W and so wellbeing, safety and health. I think that's how we came up with a wish. you know, you just want multiple ways that people can raise some of these issues, both collectively and individually. And also, I think venues where people or forums where people can talk about it collectively, because I think also if I'm struggling with burnout, it's easy for me to blame myself or think it's just me. So yeah. And then I think if we have really healthy communication, as you've been saying, both Dougal and Suzi and Jarrod, that, then that shouldn't be threatening, because, we can get into a two-way dialogue about how to resolve it. So, yeah. Okay, we have time for one more question. So, yeah, when someone's coming back from burnout, and it's sort of recovering, what do you do to keep them in that recovery space? How long, there's a piece of string in terms of how long do you need to support them? How do you sort of get them back into the workspace without putting too much pressure on? How do you kind of manage that transition?
Well, I think how long it takes in each situation will really depend on the unique circumstances of so I don't think there's one size fits all. So I think you really need to look at the unique situation. What I would say is one of the traps that I see leaders fall into is, and we've sort of alluded to this throughout the webinar, is just take work off the person, or move into here are the solutions. And as we know, one of the causes of burnout is a lack of control. So what I would suggest is, can you co-create some solutions with the person, with the organization, and with you in mind? It's almost like, what can we do that's going to co-create some solutions that works for all stakeholders? And don't just think that taking the work off them. The other thing I would recommend is look at the root causes. There are 6 root causes of burnout. And, if you just put them back into the same, what I call the contaminated water that's been causing the burnout in the first place, you're going to get into that tricky space for that person again. So I would look deeply at those 6 causes of burnout, which ones may have been at play for this person to get burnt out in the first place. For instance, it may be isolation, it might be overwork, it could be an absence of fairness, for example. So if you can start to co-create with that, that's really going to help transition back in. I'm not sure what Dougal, Jarrod, you've got to add to that. I'm sure you've got some good ideas, but those would be 2 things that I would say.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I love that idea, Suzi, about, I completely agree around, sometimes we say, we'll just take everything off them. We won't let them do anything. And they go, oh, but that was the only meaningful thing I was doing in my work. And now I've got left with the payroll and all the annoying things. I look, take a long-term perspective to getting people back. We're talking probably months, not weeks. When we think about our mental well-being. And I think too that sometimes there can be, I'm a real big fan of sort of gradual kind of exposure to work. So rather than saying, okay, next week you're going to come back for your 50 hours a week like you used to be, it's like, whoa, that might not be so good. Can you do it so that they're doing little bits and pieces, slowly building up with the flexible to cut down again as they need to, rather than just sort of dumping them back into the dirty bath water again without cleaning that. So can they do it in a graded way that they can pick up little bits here and there? The other key thing I would say is when people go off on leave for burnout, there's a danger that they become isolated because they're out of the office. So how do they keep up to date with what's going on? Not in a pressure way, not in a, well, we've got all these work things on, but almost, and coming back to the whole theme of reconnection, what's socially happening in the workplace that I'm missing out on? How are my mates going? How's the quiz, the Friday afternoon quiz team going? Are we doing okay? What's his name down at accounts doing? How's Brian out the back doing? So just keeping the person, keeping those connections in with that person who's had to go off on leave, so that they don't feel like there's some sort of isolated leper that has to be, kept at a distance, but they can come back in and really join in.
We're just about out of time, so I'm going to have to stop it there. And this conversation could go on for ages because it's very interesting and very very important. There's if you want to look at more resources, we've got the Mental Health Foundation has Mental Health Awareness Week resources around workplaces. There's a link going into the chat there. We also have our Working Well workplace wellbeing resources that are sort of year round. Now, just before we finish up, I just do want to quickly say, please take the time to give us feedback. And we have 5 copies of Suzi's book, Beyond Burnout, to give away. But you have to give us the feedback, fill out the survey in order to get it. We've learned a few things from game shows. Thank you very much to everybody. Thank you to our panelists, to Jarrod, to Suzi, to Dougal, and thank you all for participating, for contributing in the chat. I'm just going to quickly close this with a karakia. So, karakia tātou, kia whakai rea te tapu, kia wātia ai te ara, kia turuki whakataha ai, kia turuki whakataha ai, haumie huie kai kia.